My parents blocked me, cut off my rent, and let me couch surf after I admitted I lied about getting into Harvard. When I asked my mom why she never helped me, when my grades started slipping, she looked away and said, "We gave you everything. You threw it all away." I walked out. That was a year ago. Yesterday, they were quietly sobbing alone. I was 15 when I started living a double life. I grew up as a gifted child. I got perfect grades in school without even trying, quickly caught onto social cues and had somewhat of a photographic memory. But when I got to 10th grade, my luck ran short. I didn't understand what was going on in my classes, and for the first time ever, I was forced to study. Except I didn't know how to operate the world when I didn't understand things straight away, meaning I was left behind. My GPA fell from a 4.2 to a 2.8. Nothing terrible, but still enough to send me into a spiral. And the whole time I hid it from my parents. Because they're Asian. So to them, anything less than perfect is utterly disappointing. And also a reason to wail on me. But keeping it a secret was actually pretty easy, because they never once fact-checked my report cards or test results. So when college application season came around, I told them I had only applied to Ivy League schools. Which was actually true. I simply left out the part where I knew I wasn't going to get accepted, and that I was basically doomed to be a bum for the rest of my life. Back then, all I wanted was for my parents to love me, to not disown me. So I did what I had to do. When college acceptances came around, I forged a Harvard acceptance letter and plastered my name onto it. "We always knew you could do it," my mom said. My dad gave me the first hug I had ever received from him, and instead of finally admitting to being a fraud, I elongated a double life. When it was time to move into dorms, I used their rent money to get an apartment beside the university, because they had my location on their phone. I even lied about getting a full scholarship, because my grades were just that good. I remember working my third 12-hour shift in the 7-Eleven beside Harvard when I started receiving texts from family members that I didn't even know I had. They all told me what an amazing role model I was to their kids. One of them framed a photo of me in their living room for academic good luck. It was all the love I had ever craved given in one fell swoop. Part of me even smiled at my phone. It was like I was actually believing my own delusion. Until November, when Thanksgiving rolled around. My parents texted me that they were coming for a surprise visit to see my dorm and meet my friends. My head immediately started spinning with possibility, and I planned on doing everything but cave. So I downloaded Hinge and started asking every guy I matched with if I could host a Thanksgiving meal in their dorm in exchange for a good time. Unfortunately, none of them took me up on my offer. So I did the unthinkable. I drove home. I figured it would be best to break the news in person. That maybe it would help to somehow lessen the blow. But as soon as I opened the door, tears came to my eyes. Because they were literally draped head to toe in Harvard merchandise. And when I went inside, I saw the couch had a Harvard custom-made blanket, along with Harvard pillows, and the table even had a Harvard tablecloth. I stood there speechless, and that's when my dad gave me a hug again. But I couldn't take it anymore. I'm not in Harvard, I didn't get into any university. I opened the notes app on my phone and showed them the list of lies I had written out, the ones I had spent years trying to upkeep. My dad peeled himself off of me. My mom's face turned green. Next thing I knew, my dad's hand met my face. It was so hard I fell to the Harvard-themed floor. I'm sorry, I repeated while rocking back and forth. My mom threw my phone at my head. Back then, I really thought I deserved the treatment they gave me. That night, I drove back to my apartment. Obviously, they had pulled out on the rent, which meant I only had a week before I'd get booted out. Long story short, I ended up moving back to my local area and couch surfing. My entire family had blocked me, including my siblings. I got a new job, and a year later, I saved up enough to attend a community college. Life wasn't perfect by any means, but I finally made some friends who had become more like family than any relatives I ever had. We were all celebrating my birthday in the apartment I had finally gotten when I heard a knock on the door. I thought it was a friend arriving late, but it was my mother, with a black eye and her arms covered in bruises. "Your father did this," she whispered before beginning to cry. I walked her to my car and told her to wait until I got my friends to leave. I went back inside and tried to act normal. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my drink. My friend Tara noticed something was up right away. She's always been super perceptive like that. "Hey, you okay?" she asked quietly, pulling me aside. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I made up some excuse about not feeling well and asked everyone if we could continue the party another time. Everyone was cool about it, though I could tell they were confused. I helped clean up the pizza boxes and beer cans as fast as possible, practically shoving people out the door with leftover cake in their hands. After everyone left, I went back to my car. Mom was still there, hunched over in the passenger seat. I didn't know what to say. We hadn't spoken in over a year. The silence was heavy as I drove back to my apartment. I kept glancing over at her, taking in the bruises. Some were fresh, others yellowing. This clearly wasn't a one-time thing. Back at my place, I got her settled on the couch with an ice pack. My apartment wasn't much, just a studio with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it was mine. I'd worked hard for it. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors arguing on one side and watching TV on the other, but I decorated it with posters and plants to make it feel homey. I made her some tea and waited for her to talk. She just stared at the wall for a long time. Finally, she started telling me what happened. Apparently, after I left, Dad got worse. Way worse. He'd always had a temper, but losing his Harvard child pushed him over the edge. He started drinking more. The first time he hit her was about 6 months after I confessed. It escalated from there. I felt sick listening to her. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part was still angry about how they'd treated me my whole life. The expectations, the pressure, the conditional love. I asked her why she didn't leave sooner. She said she was afraid, that Dad controlled all their money. Classic abuser stuff, I guess. She told me she finally snapped when she found my old report cards while cleaning. The ones I'd hidden. She realized my grades had started slipping years ago, and instead of helping me, they'd just pushed me harder. She confronted Dad about it, saying maybe they were partly responsible for what happened. That's when he really lost it. I didn't know how to process all this. On one hand, I felt vindicated that she finally saw how their parenting had affected me. On the other hand, I was furious it took her getting struck to realize it. I made up the couch for her and told her she could stay the night. I needed time to think. The next morning was awkward. I had class at the community college, and I didn't want to miss it. I was working toward my associate's degree in computer science. Not Harvard material maybe, but I was actually learning and doing well. My professors knew my name, and I'd made friends in my study group. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely interested in what I was learning, not just memorizing for a grade. I told Mom she could stay while I was gone, but we needed to figure out a plan when I got back. When I returned from class, I found Mom had cleaned my entire apartment. The dishes were washed, the floors swept, and my laundry was folded neatly on my bed. She'd also gone grocery shopping and was cooking dinner. It smelled amazing, like the home-cooked meals I'd missed. But it also felt weird, like she was trying to buy her way back into my life with chores and food. We ate dinner mostly in silence. The food was delicious, spicy tofu and vegetables over rice, just how I liked it, but each bite felt like swallowing guilt. Finally, I asked what her plan was. She said she wanted to start over somewhere new, away from Dad. She'd taken some cash and jewelry before leaving, but it wouldn't last long. She asked if she could stay with me for a while until she found a job. I felt trapped. I barely had enough space for myself, let alone another person, and I was still working through my feelings about everything that had happened. But I couldn't just throw her out, not with those bruises still fresh. I told her she could stay for 2 weeks while she figured things out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how my lies had set off this chain of events. If I had just been honest about my grades from the beginning, maybe things would be different. But then again, my parents had created an environment where honesty felt impossible. It was a mess all around. The next day, I came home from work to find Mom on my laptop. She closed it quickly when I walked in, which immediately set off alarm bells. I asked what she was doing, and she said just checking email. But something felt off. I made a mental note to change my passwords later. A few days into her stay, I started noticing small things. My mail had been opened, my phone had been moved from where I left it, and Mom kept asking questions about my friends, my schedule, my finances. It felt less like concern and more like information gathering. Then came the first call from Dad. I was in the shower when my phone rang. When I got out, I saw a missed call from an unknown number. Mom was acting strange, fidgety. I checked my call log and saw the call had been answered and lasted 3 minutes. I confronted her, and she denied answering my phone, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. That night, I pretended to go to sleep early but actually stayed awake. Around midnight, I heard Mom whispering in the bathroom. I crept closer to listen. She was talking to Dad. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard, he's doing fine, and just need more time. My blood ran cold. The next morning, I confronted her. I asked directly if she was talking to Dad. She denied it at first, then broke down crying when I pressed her. She admitted he'd been calling her constantly since she left. She swore she wasn't telling him where we were, just trying to keep him calm so he wouldn't come looking. I wasn't sure I believed her. I started noticing other weird things too. Mom would disappear for hours, saying she was job hunting, but return with no applications filled out. Once, I found a receipt in her purse for a coffee shop just 2 blocks from my parents' house. When I asked about it, she got defensive and accused me of spying on her. Things came to a head about 10 days into her stay. I came home early from class because the lecture was canceled. I found Mom packing up my things. Not her things, my things. My laptop, some clothes, important documents. When she saw me, she froze like a deer in headlights. "What are you doing?" I asked. She stammered something about helping me organize, but it was obvious she was packing my stuff to take somewhere. I grabbed my laptop from her hands and opened it. She'd been on my bank account page. I could see she'd set up a transfer of almost all my savings to an account I didn't recognize. I canceled the transfer immediately and demanded to know what she was doing. Mom's face changed. The vulnerable, struck woman disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. She told me Dad wanted me to come home, that they'd forgive me if I just came back and did things their way. Forgive me? I laughed in disbelief. After what you both did to me? Mom's eyes narrowed. She said they'd given me everything, and I'd thrown it all away with my lies, that I owed them. When I refused, she threatened to call the police and tell them I kidnapped her. I reminded her that the bruises on her body told a different story. We were at a standoff. I told her to get out. She refused. I threatened to call the police myself. She grabbed my phone and threw it against the wall, shattering the screen. I ran to my neighbor's apartment and used their phone to call my friend Tara. She came over right away with her boyfriend Marcus. When they arrived, Mom was sitting calmly on my couch like nothing had happened. She smiled sweetly at my friends and introduced herself as if this was a normal visit. It was creepy how quickly she could switch personas. Tara looked at me questioningly. I nodded slightly, and she understood something was wrong. Marcus, who's a pretty big guy, stood by the door while Tara helped Mom gather her things. Mom protested, saying there must be some misunderstanding, but with 3 of us there, she didn't have much choice. As she left, she turned to me and said, "Your father will hear about this." It wasn't just the words, but the way she said them, like a promise of something bad to come. After she left, I broke down. I told Tara and Marcus everything, the Harvard lie, my parents' reaction, and now Mom's weird behavior. They were shocked but supportive. Marcus even offered to stay over that night, sleeping on my floor just in case Mom or Dad showed up. I gratefully accepted. The next day, I went to get my phone fixed and changed all my passwords. I also withdrew the remaining money from my bank account and opened a new one at a different bank. I wasn't taking any chances. I felt paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see my father's car or my mother's face in a crowd. A week passed without incident. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe Mom had given up. Then I got a call from an unknown number while at work. Against my better judgment, I answered it. It was Dad. His voice was eerily calm as he told me Mom had come home and explained everything. He said they wanted to make amends, that they'd realized their mistakes. He even apologized for hitting me. I didn't buy it for a second. Dad had never apologized for anything in his life. I told him I needed time to think and hung up. That night, I found a note slipped under my apartment door. "We're watching you." Just those 3 words, typed on plain paper. I called Tara in a panic. She came over and helped me check the entire apartment for hidden cameras or bugs. We didn't find anything, but that didn't mean they weren't there. The next day, I went to campus security at my community college and explained I was being harassed by family members. They took it seriously and gave me some resources, including the number for a domestic violence hotline. I called and spoke to a counselor who helped me create a safety plan. That weekend, I was working my shift at the warehouse when I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo of me entering my apartment building, taken that morning. No message, just the picture. I felt sick. They really were watching me. I decided to stay with Tara for a few days. Her apartment was across town and had better security than mine. I packed some essentials and headed over after work. As I was loading my bag into my car, I noticed a familiar vehicle parked down the street, my dad's silver Lexus. I pretended not to see it and drove off, taking a convoluted route to make sure I wasn't followed. At Tara's place, I finally felt safe enough to think clearly. I needed to figure out what my parents wanted. It couldn't just be about me coming home. There had to be more to it. I remembered Mom going through my things, looking at my bank account. Maybe it was about money? I called my sister Emma for the first time in over a year. She was surprised to hear from me. When I asked about Mom and Dad, she got quiet. Finally, she admitted that things had gotten bad financially. Dad's business was failing, and they were deeply in debt. They'd been counting on me to graduate from Harvard and get a high-paying job to help support them. My confession had ruined those plans. It all made sense now. The sudden reconciliation attempt, Mom's interest in my finances. They weren't after me. They were after what I could provide for them. The thought made me angry. Even now, they didn't care about me as a person, just what I could do for them. I stayed at Tara's for a week, only going to class and work, then straight back to her place. No sign of my parents during that time. I started to think maybe they'd given up for real. I decided to return to my apartment, but I was still cautious. I asked Marcus to check out first to make sure no one was waiting for me. He reported back that the apartment looked untouched, but there was a large envelope leaning against my door. I asked him to bring it to me. Inside was a stack of papers, financial documents showing my parents' massive debt, medical bills for my dad. Apparently he had heart problems I didn't know about, and a handwritten note from Mom begging for help. I felt conflicted. On one hand, they were still my parents, and they were clearly desperate. On the other hand, they had abused me, rejected me, and were now stalking me. I decided to sleep on it before making any decisions. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls from my mom. I finally answered, ready to tell her to leave me alone, but she was hysterical. Dad had collapsed and was in the hospital. She needed me to come right away. I was suspicious. It seemed too convenient after I'd just learned about his heart condition. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. I called the hospital directly to verify. They confirmed my dad was indeed a patient in the cardiac unit. I felt guilty for doubting her, but still wary. I decided to visit him but told Tara exactly where I was going and asked her to call me in an hour to check in. At the hospital, I found Dad looking frail in his bed, hooked up to various machines. Mom was sitting beside him, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she rushed over and hugged me tight. I stood stiffly, not returning the embrace. Dad opened his eyes and reached out a hand to me. I hesitated before taking it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice weak, "for everything." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe him, to have the loving father I'd always craved, but I couldn't forget the years of pressure, the violence, the stalking. I mumbled something non-committal and sat down. The doctor came in and explained Dad had suffered a minor heart attack. He would recover but needed to reduce stress and change his lifestyle. As the doctor spoke, I noticed Mom watching me intently, gauging my reaction. It felt calculated, like they were using Dad's condition to manipulate me. After the doctor left, Mom started talking about how expensive the medical bills would be, how they might lose the house. Dad chimed in weakly about how proud he was that I was in college, even if it wasn't Harvard, how he knew I'd take care of them in their old age. The guilt trip was so obvious it was almost laughable. I made an excuse about needing to get back to work and left, promising to visit again soon. I had no intention of keeping that promise. As I walked to my car, I felt a weight lifting. I saw their manipulation tactics clearly now, and they no longer had power over me. But my relief was short-lived. When I got back to Tara's apartment, I found the door slightly ajar. Inside, the place had been ransacked. My laptop was gone, along with my backpack containing my school notes and textbooks. Tara's things seemed untouched. This wasn't a random break-in. It was targeted. I called the police and filed a report, but without proof of who did it, there wasn't much they could do. I knew it was my parents, or someone they'd hired. I felt violated and angry. They were escalating, becoming more desperate. That night, I got a text from Mom. "We found your school papers. Community college? Really? You could do so much better. Come home and we'll help you transfer somewhere worthy of your talents." I didn't respond, but I was seething. They'd stolen my property, invaded my friend's home, and still had the audacity to criticize my education choices. I decided it was time to fight back. The next day, I went to the bank and took out a small loan. I used the money to buy a decent used car. Nothing fancy, just reliable transportation that wasn't registered to my old address. I found a new apartment in a building with security cameras and a doorman. I didn't tell anyone where I was moving, not even Tara at first. I needed a clean break. I also went to the police station and filed for a restraining order against both my parents. The officer was sympathetic when I showed him the threatening texts and explained the break-in. He helped me fill out the paperwork and told me what to expect next. For the next few weeks, I lived like a ghost. I went to class and work, then straight home to my new place. I kept my head down and avoided social media completely. I missed my friends but knew it was safer this way, at least until the restraining order was processed. Then one evening, as I was walking to my car after class, I spotted my mother waiting in the parking lot. She hadn't seen me yet. I ducked behind a column and watched as she approached every Asian student who walked by, showing them a photo on her phone, presumably of me. She was hunting for me. I snuck out another exit and called the police. They came quickly, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. The officer took my statement and promised to patrol the area more frequently. I felt like I was living in a thriller movie, constantly looking over my shoulder. A few days later, I received notice that the restraining order had been granted. My parents couldn't legally come within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. It was a relief, but I knew a piece of paper wouldn't necessarily stop them. I was right to be concerned. The very next day, I found my car's tires slashed in the college parking lot. No note, no witnesses, but the message was clear. I had the car towed to a garage and took an Uber to work, feeling defeated. How long could this go on? That night, I got a call from Emma. She was crying, barely coherent. Between sobs, she told me Dad had hit her for the first time. Apparently, he'd been drinking heavily since his heart attack, and when the restraining order was served, he'd completely lost it. Mom had told Emma it was all my fault for abandoning the family. I felt terrible for Emma, but also suspicious of the timing. Was this another manipulation tactic? I asked if she wanted to come stay with me for a while. She hesitated, then said Mom wouldn't let her leave the house. That raised all kinds of red flags. Emma was 20, not a child. I offered to come pick her up, but she said it was too dangerous right now. She'd call me when it was safe. The call ended abruptly, and I was left wondering if she'd been caught talking to me. I tried calling back several times, but it went straight to voicemail. Over the next few days, I texted Emma repeatedly, but got only brief, strange responses that didn't sound like her at all. "I'm fine. Stop worrying. Need some space." The messages felt off, too formal, too dismissive. Emma and I had never been super close, but these texts lacked her usual sarcastic tone and emoji usage. I began to suspect my mother was controlling her phone. I tried calling Emma's friends from high school, but none had heard from her in days. Her roommate at the local community college said Emma hadn't been to class all week and wasn't responding to texts about assignments. This wasn't like my sister at all. She took her studies seriously, even if she wasn't at an Ivy League school. The next day, I went to class distracted, constantly checking my phone for messages from Emma. Nothing. After class, I found my professor had held me back to talk about my recent work. My grades had been slipping again, not because I didn't understand the material, real, but because I couldn't focus with all the drama. As we talked, I broke down and told her everything. Professor Jenkins listened without judgment, then surprised me by sharing that she'd escaped an abusive family herself. She connected me with campus resources I didn't know existed: free counseling, legal aid for students, even emergency housing if I needed it. With her encouragement, I made an appointment with a counselor that same day. Talking to someone objective helped me see things more clearly. The counselor suggested that my parents' behavior showed signs of narcissism and possibly other personality disorders. She helped me understand that their actions weren't my fault and gave me strategies for protecting myself. One of her suggestions was to document everything. So I started keeping a detailed log of every incident, every text, every sighting. I installed security cameras in my new apartment and got a dash cam for my car. I changed my phone number and only gave it to a select few people. I was taking back control. A week passed without incident, then 2. I started to relax slightly, focusing more on school and less on looking over my shoulder. My grades improved, and I even went out with friends a couple of times, though I was still careful about sharing my location. Then one evening, I got a text from Emma's phone. "Help me. Dad's gone crazy. I'm hiding in the bathroom," followed by our old home address. My heart raced. I called 911 immediately and told them my sister was in danger. Then, against my better judgment, I got in my car and drove to my parents' house. I arrived just as the police were pulling up. I explained who I was and why I'd called. The officers approached the house cautiously while I waited by their car, heart pounding. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged with both my parents. No sign of Emma. The officers explained that my parents were confused about the call. They said Emma wasn't even home. She was away at college in another state, had been for months. I showed them the text from her phone, but my dad calmly explained that Emma had lost her phone last week, and they were helping her track it down. I felt like I was losing my mind. The officers clearly thought this was a misunderstanding or a prank. As they talked to my parents, I noticed Mom clutching Emma's phone, the same one the text had come from. When she saw me looking, she quickly slipped it into her pocket. I pointed this out to the officers, who asked Mom about the phone. She smoothly explained it was her phone, just the same model as Emma's. She even showed them the screen with her own wallpaper and apps. I knew it was Emma's phone. I recognized the case with its distinctive crack in the corner, but I couldn't prove it. The officers left after warning everyone about false reports. As they drove away, Dad approached me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You should come inside," he said. "We need to talk about what you just did." I backed away toward my car. "Where's Emma?" I demanded. I know that was her phone. Mom joined him, her face a mask of concern. "Sweetie, Emma's fine. She's at UCLA, remember? You can call her dorm if you don't believe us." I did remember Emma getting accepted to UCLA, but I thought she'd deferred enrollment after all the family drama. Had I misunderstood our conversation? Was I really losing it? Dad took a step closer. "You're not well," he said softly. "First the lies about Harvard, now imagining your sister is in danger. Let us help you." For a moment, I almost believed them. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the stress had gotten to me. But then I noticed Dad's hand. His knuckles were bruised like he'd hit something, or someone, recently. I got in my car and locked the doors as Dad approached. He knocked on the window, his face now angry. "You can't keep running," he shouted as I started the engine. "Family is forever." I drove straight to Tara's place, shaking the whole way. I told her everything, and she immediately called Emma's dorm at UCLA. After some back and forth with the resident advisor, we confirmed that Emma hadn't been seen on campus for at least 2 weeks. She'd told her roommate she was visiting family and would be back after spring break, which had ended days ago. Now I was really worried. I called the police again and asked them to do a welfare check specifically for Emma. The dispatcher took my information but warned me that since I'd just had officers at the house, it might not be prioritized. Tara suggested we drive to UCLA ourselves to check Emma's dorm room for clues. It was a 6-hour drive, but I was desperate enough to try anything. We set out early the next morning in Tara's car. At UCLA, we found Emma's roommate, a friendly girl named Jasmine. She confirmed Emma had left campus 2 weeks ago, saying she was going home for spring break. She'd been texting Jasmine sporadically since then, mostly just saying she was fine and needed more time at home. The last text came 3 days ago. Jasmine let us look around Emma's side of the room. Everything seemed normal until I checked her desk drawer. Inside was a journal I'd never seen before. I hesitated to read it. It felt invasive, but this was an emergency. The most recent entry was from the day before spring break. Dad called again. Says he needs me to come home and help convince him to come back. Says it's my duty as a daughter. I'm scared of what he'll do if I refuse. Mom's eye is still bruised from last time. My blood ran cold. The him had to be me. I flipped back through earlier entries and found more disturbing details. Dad's drinking getting worse. Mom becoming more manipulative. Both of them obsessed with getting me back under their control, though Emma didn't understand why. I took photos of the relevant pages with my phone, thanked Jasmine, and left with Tara. In the car, I called the police again, this time with concrete evidence that Emma might be in danger. The officer took me more seriously this time and promised to send someone to check the house thoroughly. We started the long drive back, both of us tense and worried. Halfway home, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Emma, whispering quickly, "I'm okay. I'm at Uncle Jordan's house. Don't go home. They're waiting for you." The call cut off before I could ask questions. Uncle Jordan was my dad's brother. They weren't close. Jordan had distanced himself from the family years ago. I'd always liked him, though. He was the black sheep who'd chosen to become an artist instead of a businessman, much to my father's disgust. I didn't have Jordan's number or address, but I remembered he lived somewhere near Berkeley. I searched online and found a listing for a Jordan Chen with an art studio in Oakland. It seemed promising. I called the number listed, but it went to voicemail. I left a message explaining who I was and asking him to call me back urgently. We continued driving, now headed toward Oakland instead of home. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was Jordan. He confirmed Emma was with him and gave us his address. He sounded worried but wouldn't explain more over the phone. When we finally arrived at Jordan's modest house, it was past midnight. Emma opened the door before we could knock. She looked terrible, thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but she was alive. She hugged me tightly, something she'd never done before. Inside, Jordan made us tea while Emma explained everything. After I got the restraining order, Dad had become obsessed with getting me back. Not out of love, but because he needed access to my college fund, which I didn't even know existed. Apparently, Grandma had set up accounts for both Emma and me years ago, but they could only be accessed when we turned 21, or graduated from a 4-year college. Dad had been embezzling from his company to cover gambling debts. Now the company was investigating, and he needed to replace the money fast. He'd already drained Emma's account by forcing her to sign the paperwork. Mine was next. But since I'd cut contact, he couldn't get to it. That's why Mom had been so interested in my finances, why they'd stolen my laptop and school papers. They were looking for bank statements, trying to figure out if I knew about the account, and that's why they'd lured Emma home, to use her as bait to get to me. Emma had been kept essentially prisoner in our old house for the past 2 weeks. Mom had taken her phone and was impersonating her in texts to friends. The text I'd received was sent during a rare moment when Emma had managed to grab her phone while Mom was distracted. After the police visit, Dad had been furious. He'd hit Emma again and locked her in her room. She'd managed to escape through the window that night while our parents were arguing downstairs. She'd taken a bus to Berkeley, remembering Uncle Jordan's address from a family gathering years ago. She'd been afraid to use her phone in case they were tracking it, which is why she'd waited until she reached Jordan's house to contact me. Jordan confirmed the story and added that he'd been trying to help Emma get a restraining order of her own. He'd also contacted a lawyer friend about the embezzlement situation. It was a mess, but at least Emma was safe now. That night, I slept on Jordan's couch while Tara took the guest room floor and Emma got the bed. Despite everything, I slept better than I had in months. Having allies made all the difference. The next morning, Jordan's lawyer friend came over to discuss options. He advised both Emma and me to file police reports about the financial fraud and coercion. He also suggested I check with the bank that held my college fund to make sure no one had accessed it. I called the bank and, after providing identification, discovered the account did indeed exist. Grandma had set aside $50,000 for my education. The account was still intact, but there had been 3 attempted withdrawals in the past month, all rejected because they lacked proper authorization. The lawyer helped us prepare statements for the police. It was painful documenting everything our parents had done, but also cathartic. For the first time, I felt like someone in authority might actually believe us and help. We filed the reports that afternoon. The officers were professional and supportive, taking our statements separately and photographing Emma's fading bruises. They explained that financial crimes and domestic abuse were taken very seriously, and they would investigate immediately. That evening, as we were having dinner at Jordan's, my phone rang. It was the police. They'd gone to my parents' house with a search warrant based on our reports. They'd found financial documents confirming the embezzlement, along with notes detailing plans to access my college fund. Both my parents had been arrested. I felt numb hearing the news. Despite everything they'd done, they were still my parents. I had complex feelings about them facing jail time, but I also felt relief knowing they couldn't hurt us anymore. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, meetings with the district attorney, and sessions with victim advocates. The evidence against my parents was substantial. Dad was facing charges for embezzlement, fraud, domestic violence, and violating the restraining order. Mom was charged as an accessory to most of these, plus additional charges for her role in essentially kidnapping Emma. Through it all, Jordan was our rock. He opened his home to both of us, helped us navigate the legal system, and never once made us feel like a burden. I learned that he'd cut ties with my father years ago precisely because of his controlling and abusive tendencies. Jordan had tried to intervene when we were kids but had been shut out of the family as a result. A week after the arrests, I returned to my apartment to gather more clothes and check my mail. Among the bills and flyers was a letter from the community college. I opened it to find I'd been awarded a scholarship for the next academic year based on my improved grades and a recommendation from Professor Jenkins. It wasn't Harvard, but it was something I'd earned honestly, and I was proud of it. As I was leaving, I ran into my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patel, who had always been kind to me. She asked where I'd been staying, and I gave her a brief explanation. She nodded understandingly, and then surprised me by saying, "Your mother came by several times looking for you." She seemed unstable. I didn't tell her anything, don't worry. I thanked her for her discretion and headed back to Jordan's, thinking about how many people had protected me without my even knowing. Mrs. Patel, Professor Jenkins, Tara and Marcus, Jordan, even the bank that had rejected those unauthorized withdrawal attempts. I wasn't alone anymore. Back at Jordan's, Emma and I talked about our plans. She decided to transfer from UCLA to a college closer to Oakland so she could live with Jordan while finishing her degree. I was considering my options too. The community college was good, but with the scholarship and my college fund now secured, I could potentially transfer to a 4-year university. That night, as we all sat in Jordan's living room watching a movie, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. Not happiness exactly. There was still too much trauma and uncertainty for that, but a quiet sense that things were going to be okay, that I was going to be okay. The preliminary hearing for my parents was scheduled for the following month. The prosecutor warned us it would be difficult, that my parents' defense would likely try to paint us as ungrateful, lying children, but with the evidence collected from their house and our consistent testimonies, she was confident the case would move forward to trial. I wasn't looking forward to facing them in court, to seeing their faces and potentially hearing them deny everything they'd done, but I knew it was necessary, not just for justice, but for closure, for the chance to finally break free from their control and manipulation. As the hearing date approached, I threw myself into my studies and work. I found that keeping busy helped manage my anxiety. I also started seeing a therapist regularly, working through the complex emotions around my parents' abuse and the upcoming legal proceedings. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on Jordan's back porch, looking at the stars and thinking about how much had changed in just a few years. From the gifted child living a lie to keep my parents happy, to a young adult facing them in court to hold them accountable. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it was mine. Emma joined me outside, wrapped in a blanket. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said something that stuck with me. "You know, we're not just victims of their story anymore. We're writing our own now." She was right. Tomorrow would be hard, but it was just one chapter in a much longer story, our story. And for the first time, we were the ones holding the pen. The morning of the hearing arrived way too fast. I barely slept, just tossed and turned all night thinking about facing my parents again. Jordan made us all breakfast, but I could only manage a few bites of toast. My stomach was doing somersaults somersaults. Emma looked just as nervous, pushing her eggs around her plate without eating much. Tara and Marcus showed up to drive with us to the courthouse. I was grateful for the support squad. The whole ride there, I kept checking my phone even though there were no new messages. Just a nervous habit, I guess. The courthouse was this massive stone building that made me feel tiny walking up the steps. Inside, our victim advocate met us and explained what would happen. She was this no-nonsense woman named Vanessa who'd been helping us prepare for weeks. She walked us through security and to the courtroom where the hearing would take place. I nearly threw up when I saw my parents being led in by officers. Dad looked thinner, his usually perfect hair messy. Mom had no makeup on, which I'd never seen before. They both looked older somehow, like they'd aged years in just weeks. They didn't look at us at first, but then Dad's eyes found mine. I expected anger, but instead, he just looked empty. It was weird and unsettling. The hearing itself was pretty quick. The prosecutor presented the evidence: financial records, Emma's journal, photos of her bruises, my documentation of the stalking incidents, testimony from Uncle Jordan about Emma showing up at his house. Our parents' lawyer tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding, that we were exaggerating things because we were angry about their strict parenting. The judge wasn't buying it. When it was over, the judge ruled there was enough evidence for the case to go to trial. My parents were let out, and Mom finally looked at us. She mouthed something that looked like, "I'm sorry," but I couldn't be sure. Maybe it was just wishful thinking on my part. Outside the courtroom, I felt like I could breathe again. Vanessa told us we'd done great and that the evidence was strong. The trial wouldn't happen for months, but this was an important first step. As we were leaving, Jordan got a call from the lawyer friend who'd been helping us. Apparently, Dad's company had found even more evidence of embezzlement. The amount was way higher than we'd thought, close to $300,000 over several years. I felt sick hearing that, not just because of the crime itself, but because it made me realize how long the deception had been going on. While I was lying about my grades, Dad was stealing from his company. While Mom was pressuring me to be perfect, she was helping cover up his crimes. We were a family built on lies. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, therapy sessions, and trying to get back to some kind of normal life. I returned to my apartment since it felt safe now with my parents in custody. Emma decided to stay with Jordan for the summer before transferring to a college nearby for the fall semester. One afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, still paranoid about unknown callers, but something made me pick up. It was my grandmother, my dad's mom. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She lived in China and rarely contacted us directly. "I heard what happened," she said in her heavily accented English. "I am sorry. I didn't know what to say." I'd always thought she was just like my parents, demanding, critical, focused only on achievement, but her voice sounded genuinely sad. "The money I set aside for you and your sister," she continued, "it was not meant to cause such trouble. I wanted to give you choices your father never had." We talked for almost an hour. She told me things about my dad I never knew, how his own father had been even stricter, more violent, how she'd tried to protect him but failed, how she'd hoped the money would help us escape the cycle. It didn't excuse what my parents did, but it helped me understand a little better. Before hanging up, she asked if she could visit sometime. I told her I'd think about it. It was weird to discover this whole other side to my family story when I thought I knew everything. Summer arrived, bringing heat waves and a new sense of purpose. I decided to transfer to a state university in the fall to finish my degree in computer science. My grades at community college were good enough to get me accepted with a partial scholarship. Between that, my savings from work, and the college fund from grandma, I could afford it without going into massive debt. I found a new apartment closer to campus and started packing up my old place. As I was sorting through my stuff, I found the Harvard acceptance letter I'd forged years ago. I almost threw it away but decided to keep it as a reminder of how far I'd come. Not from failure to success, but from living a lie to living honestly. The trial date was set for September. Our lawyer warned us it would be intense. Multiple days of testimony, cross-examination, the works. I was dreading it, but also ready to get it over with. Emma felt the same way. We spent a lot of time together that summer, rebuilding our relationship. We'd never been close growing up, both too busy trying to please our parents in different ways. Now we were actually becoming friends. In August, I moved into my new place and started getting ready for fall classes. Tara helped me set up my apartment, and we celebrated with takeout and cheap wine on my new, secondhand couch. It felt good to be moving forward. Then I got a letter from my mother. The return address was the county jail. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note. "I know you probably won't believe me, but I am truly sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for everything. For pushing you so hard. For not protecting you and Emma from your father's anger. For trying to control your life instead of supporting your choices. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. There was more." Explanations about how she'd gotten involved in Dad's financial schemes, how she'd been afraid to leave him, how she'd convinced herself that what they were doing was for our own good. It sounded sincere, but I'd seen Mom turn on the charm before. I wasn't sure what to believe. I showed the letter to my therapist at our next session. She suggested that regardless of whether Mom was being genuine, I should decide what would help me move forward. Did I want to respond? Did I want to try for some kind of reconciliation? Or did I need a clean break? I thought about it for days. Finally, I wrote back. Just a short note saying I'd received her letter and needed time to process everything. I didn't promise forgiveness or future contact. It was the most honest response I could give. The week before the trial, I got another surprise. The prosecutor called to say my parents wanted to make a deal. Dad would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for Mom being offered a lesser plea deal, accessory after the fact instead of full conspiracy charges. It would mean no trial, no testimony, no cross-examination. Dad would likely get 5 to 10 years. Mom might get 1 to 2 years plus probation. Emma and I talked it over with Jordan and our lawyer. Part of me wanted the trial, wanted to face them and tell my story publicly, but another part was relieved at the thought of avoiding that stress. In the end, we agreed to the deal. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. The plea hearing was nothing like I'd imagined. Dad stood before the judge, looking small in his orange jumpsuit, and admitted to everything: the embezzlement, the abuse, abuse, the stalking, all of it. His voice cracked when he talked about hitting Emma. Mom cried silently throughout the whole thing. When it was over, Dad was sentenced to 8 years with possibility of parole after 5. Mom got 18 months. They were led away without looking at us. I felt empty. Not satisfied, not angry, just drained. Emma squeezed my hand as we left the courtroom. That night, we had dinner at Jordan's with Tara, Marcus, and Professor Jenkins, who'd become something of a mentor to me. We didn't celebrate exactly. It didn't feel right to celebrate my parents going to prison, but we acknowledged that a chapter had closed. We could all move forward now. The next day, I started classes at my new university. It was intimidating being around so many students who'd taken the traditional path, who hadn't had their education interrupted by family drama and court cases, but I reminded myself that I'd earned my place there through hard work, not lies or manipulation. My first computer science professor was this brilliant woman who'd worked in Silicon Valley before teaching. After our first class, I stayed behind to introduce myself. I mentioned I'd transferred from community college, and she smiled. Some of my best students came through that route, she said. It shows determination. That simple comment meant more to me than any Harvard acceptance letter ever could have.